If we're gonna hide in here, we might as well turn off.
Victor Crowley's tragic and horrifying story began with his parents, Thomas and Cheyenne Crowley, who lived in a remote house in the Honey Island swamps of New Orleans. Cheyenne had terminal cancer, and they hired a nurse named Lena to care for her. However, an affair developed between Thomas and Lena, leading to Lena's pregnancy. In a shocking and unfortunate turn of events, Cheyenne cursed Lena and her unborn child in her dying moments. After Cheyenne's death, Lena gave birth to a son with a neoplasm or tumor disease, but died in shock at the sight of her own baby. Mr. Crowley, filled with shame and regret, kept Victor hidden away in isolation as he grew into adulthood. Victor had no friends and lived in seclusion. Over time, Thomas forgave himself and learned to love his son. However, the secret of Victor's existence and his diseased skin eventually spread throughout the neighborhood. On Halloween night, a group of young trick-or-treaters taunted and bullied Victor from outside the house. They even threw fireworks, one of which ignited a fire at the door. Thomas arrived just in time to rescue Victor and the house, but he accidentally struck Victor in the face with a ratchet while trying to extinguish the fire. Thomas succumbed to his grief and guilt, unaware that Victor had somehow revived. Victor Crowley emerged as an undead serial murderer with low intelligence, but great strength and supernatural traits. He became stuck on the night of his death, relentlessly seeking his father and killing anyone who approached his house. Victor Crowley is the poster boy of the Hatchet franchise, but his story goes beyond movies. A comic book titled Victor Crowley's Hatchet Halloween Tales, which is divided into 2 issues, has a total of 7 short stories that are enormously engaging and thrilling. So in this video, we will explore these 7 stories that feature Victor Crowley beyond movies, and in his most ruthless form. Let's begin, shall we? Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Heartbreak and Victor Crowley do not mix well. The thing about Victor Crowley and his swamps is that somehow people always find themselves drawn to the place, to him, to his murderous rage. No matter how haunted or dangerous the place might be, people still find their way there, as if it has a certain draw to it. And that's probably a part of Crowley's curse. In the first story, a young man describes the tragic story of his girlfriend. His girlfriend, Chris, and he had been together since high school and were more than just best friends or lovers. However, the 2 of them had to go separate ways for college, and that was the first time they found themselves away from each other. Of course, the couple couldn't really come to terms with the feeling, and Chris's boyfriend had decided that he would go soon to get a transfer, but that would have taken some time. Meanwhile, Chris got invited by a few friends to go camping, and although she didn't want to go, he insisted that she should, as it would be fun for her. I don't know about fun, but it was definitely some experience. As would have been expected, the Bayou Butcher struck the group of friends with his chainsaw. There was blood being spilled everywhere. Boys and girls were being slashed in 2. Just the good old Victor Crowley massacre. Of course, Chris's boyfriend had lost all reason to live and wanted to confront his murderer. Or was it something else he wanted? Whatever the case, he went to find Victor Crowley, but before actually coming to the place, he had done some extensive research about the serial killer and even talked to the locals. But the thing with monsters is that you do not really know what they do in the shadows, and once you get to know them, you do not live to tell the tale. He reached the forest on Halloween night, and Crowley had decorated the place with limbs, heads, and lanterns. The boy was shocked to see the tree adorned with human body parts when Victor made his presence known. The boy knew that his time was up, but he made a run for his life. Increasingly, while running away from Crowley, the boy seemed to actually be leading Crowley to a specific spot. Was it going to be a trap? Well, no, he wanted to die at Victor's hand, at the exact same spot where his girlfriend had died 2 months ago. Victor smashed his hand into the boy's guts, spilling the blood and intestines out of the body. And just like that, the love ended in a sorry fashion. It isn't as effective as a Shakespearean tragedy, but it isn't a bad story either. In the company of freaks. So what do you think happens when a freak show owner decides to recruit Victor Crowley? Well, we're about to find out. Bruce Wayne in Dark Knight said that one man's tool is another man's weapon. Similarly, one man's accident often becomes another man's legacy. In the story, Katie Parsons, the boss of the freak show, comes to Crowley's humble abode to find Crowley. Parsons' freaks see a hooded figure running away from them. The reptilian man named Gazor ran after the figure, but instead bumped into another man named Slim, who, as the name suggests, was extremely thin and equally tall. They tried to pursue, and a pair of conjoined twins joined the fray. However, it was a clown that ultimately got the hooded figure. To their surprise, it wasn't Crowley, but just a young boy. Parsons asked the boy if he knew the whereabouts of Crowley or how to find him, and the boy said that he did know where Crowley lived. Parsons believed that he finally got himself a guide who would take the group straight to Crowley's cabin. However, the boy was petrified by the idea of going there on Halloween night. But it wasn't just like he could resist following the orders of a bunch of literal freaks for long. The boy led them straight to Crowley's door. Gazor knocked at it, hoping that Crowley would meet and greet him, but there was no answer. Just as Gazor turned around, Crowley's hand smashed through the door and into Gazor's skull. He soon learned that Crowley was not really an old wives' tale. Katie initially tried to reason with Crowley, telling him that he could make Crowley a bona fide star, but he was not the most patient man, and shot Crowley multiple times, knocking him out. The conjoined twins went to check him out, but unbeknownst to them, Crowley rose up behind them and dissected the twins into two halves. Parsons knew that Victor Crowley was unstoppable, and he made a run for his life, asking others to do the same. One by one, Crowley was taking down Parsons' freaks. A minor turning point came when another freak named Mama Rose, a beautiful woman with 3 teats, showed him her assets. Crowley seemed to be taken aback by the sight, just as most men would, but she was hiding a knife behind her back. But she couldn't go through with the strike because she was up against Victor Crowley. He held her face with both hands and twisted it, breaking Mama Rose's neck. Soon Crowley caught up with Parsons and had him pinned, but the clown ran his chainsaw through Crowley's back, presumably killing him. But then again, monsters do not die. Victor first took care of the clown and then decapitated Parsons. Sometimes the only way to understand fear is to look it in the eye and hope it doesn't stare back, because if it does catch you looking, it becomes a nightmare that lasts forever. Gored to Death. Gored to Death is an extremely short story, with Victor being the only one alive in it. Honey Island Swamp was something of an extremely strange place. Years of decomposing corpses of Victor's victims had fertilized the spot, and the indomitable will of nature had overcome the odds to produce a single glorious aberration. But this pumpkin harvest was not the ordinary kind that waits for the otherworldly blessing of a great spiritual outsider. This was Victor's harvest. His swamp. Victor had recently killed another one of his victims, and the blood was still dripping from his hands. Moreover, it was Halloween night, a night when violent death was enough to plant the seed of nightmares. The swamp was filled with absolutely monstrous pumpkins, filled with blood on the inside. However, Victor was about to become the victim of his own making. The vines came to life and grabbed Victor from all sides. One of the pumpkins struck Victor, puncturing his chest through and through. So much so that he was throwing up blood. But the evil Halloween spirit was, of course, not the only thing there that was evil, and Victor's evilness was beyond all other evil. It didn't take him much time to completely uproot the evil, monstrous pumpkin. Weed. They say Halloween in New Orleans is like Christmas, but for freaks. Or at least that's what writer James Couric thinks. We meet a man named Weed, not because he was a dealer, but because he survived innumerable health issues even before turning 5. The doctors had given up on him, but the boy survived, and his father took to calling him Weed. Something kept on growing despite all odds. His father had disappeared 8 years prior to now, and since that day, he has been planning to visit the swamp. Like others, Weed wanted to catch Crowley, or better yet, kill him. But all of them had failed, and it seemed like Weed was a man who liked to plan. According to him, they all died because they came by water and landed nearby his cabin. They never made it back to the boat before Crowley sank it to the bottom of the swamp, or tore it into pieces. However, Weed was counting on a boat to get him out of there just in time. Weed attracted Crowley's attention, and the hillbilly hellion came right out with his axe in hand. Weed then started running, well aware that Victor was following him. The man had brought a few things to slow Crowley down. Victor stepped on the shrapnel and tripped. This gave Weed a head start, but Victor soon followed. He was trying to get the killer to run into a pit trap. Surprisingly, the guy succeeded. But Victor stuck a sharp piece of wood into Weed's foot. I have to say that the frail-looking man was more resilient than he seemed. Weed pulled out the piece of wood and moved on to working on the next trap. He poured gasoline and planned to burn Victor just as he stepped on the gas. And that's exactly what Weed did. However, he knew that Victor was a resilient son of a prick, so Weed still needed to escape. He had done everything according to plan. His car's door was unlocked, the gas tank was full, the keys were in the ignition, and all he needed to do was reach the door. Alas, he was still late and ended up getting decapitated. Keep your distance. This one's actually a funny one-page joke. Victor is about to attack a young man wearing a mask. However, given the COVID pandemic, the man asks Victor to maintain social distancing. Victor obliges and goes back a few steps before throwing his axe straight into the guy. Meanwhile, an alligator looked at the upholding events from the water. Dimitri fought a bear. So, albino animals are usually all white without any pigmentation, right? So what would an albino grizzly look like? Well, exactly like a polar bear, but with red eyes. Ghost was a legendary albino grizzly of Siberia, a beast that was so terrifying that the locals refused to utter even a single word about the hulking beast. It weighed over 1,600 pounds and stood at about 13 feet. The ghost was the kind of terror that no man had ever seen. When disaster struck, it was up to Dimitri alone to detain Ghost until guns could be reloaded. But Dimitri took care of it. He was a prolific hunter. From great white sharks to enormous crocodiles, he had hunted nearly every creature. And now Dimitri wanted to go for the big prize. His most audacious hunt. And the prey? Oh yes, Victor Crowley, the undead butcher of Bayou. Dmitry Dragovich and his team started off on the most thrilling adventure to the very swamps of Louisiana to put the spirit of Victor to rest. Permanently. The thing about Dmitry was that he used to film his adventures and air them to earn money, much like a high-octane and very real but very violent reality show. And sometimes they would need to have some gimmicks. For instance, this time around, one of his crew members had dressed up like Victor Crowley in the case the man was a no-show. This guy would be running through the woods out of focus because if the audience saw nothing, they would not come back. But before they could find Crowley, Crowley found them. Of course, it was a bloodbath as Victor started to massacre the crew members in cold blood with no remorse or qualms. But then Dmitry engaged Victor. The rest of the crew ran away, leaving Dmitry behind, but not entirely behind because Victor caught up with the survivors, brandishing Dmitry's severed arms in his hands. Which Way the Honey Island Swamp? Written by Adam Green, the story features 3 witches and their rather unfortunate adventure with Victor Crowley. Turns out that one of the witches, named Kathy, had messed up a bad luck spell and used their pet cat's eye instead of a newt's eye. Well, the poor witch should have Googled it, just as the cat suggested. But Sister Sarah had a solution. She was taking the other 2 to the most cursed place in all of Earth, a place filled with tragedy, pain, and suffering. According to Sarah, the most surefire way to get rid of oneself of a curse is to let it be absorbed by the presence of a greater curse. But that didn't quite happen. The witches ended up holding their heads in shame and anger, quite literally. In this one, however, they showed that Victor actually takes help from his dear daddy, whose ghost is always around Victor. Turns out that Victor was killed mistakenly by his father, whose ghost couldn't come to terms with it and stayed with Victor, helping him do what he does best. We also released a video on Victor's backstory in the Hatchet movies if you have reached this point. I'm sure you'd be interested in watching the other one too. I'll leave a link in the description. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.